Amie Potsic, and welcome to Art Watch on WCAG 95.3 FM, 1520 AM, and online at 953wchg.com every Wednesday from 1 to 1:30. We bring you in-depth and behind-the-scenes interviews with artists and creative leaders shaping the local art scene to the international art world. I'm an artist, author, curator, and CEO of Amie Potsic Art Advisory. As an art advisor, I support artists, collectors, and institutions on curatorial projects, legacy planning, and AI. Thanks so much for joining us on Art Watch. Today we're speaking with photographer Richard Boutwell about his current exhibition, The Still Small Voice, on view at the Goodyear Gallery at Dickinson College through October 6th. Thanks so much for joining us, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Let me introduce my guest. Richard Boutwell is a photographer and printmaker whose work explores the intersection of personal history, spirituality, and the American landscape. Originally from Joshua Tree, California, he draws on the desert's stark beauty to address themes of conservation, mythology, and the human impact on the environment. Boutwell's recognized for his large-scale black and white photographs and handmade platinum palladium prints, bridging 19th century processes with 21st century digital innovation. After apprenticing with noted photographers Michael A. Smith and Paula Chamley, he went on to develop a distinctive practice that integrates traditional photography with contemporary technologies, including 3D scanning and digital mapping. His photographs have been exhibited nationally and internationally, are held in public and private collections, and he teaches fine art printing to students worldwide through his educational platform, BW Mastery. His work is currently on view in Still Small Voice at the Goodyear Gallery at Dickinson College through October 6th. So it's great to have you, Richard, and congrats on your show.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for making the show kind of what it is.
Well, thank you.
I thought I had a totally other idea until we talked, and so yeah,
oh, that's awesome.
You're like number one on my list today. So.
Oh, well, you know, I've been a fan of your work for a long time, and you know that.
20 years, maybe?
Yeah, and so it's actually just so wonderful to see how you've evolved over time, and what your new work is just so exciting and deep and just enriching. So I'm so excited for you. I just think it's amazing. I'm really excited to talk about the show and your work. So before we dig into the show, I want to hear a little bit more about your work overall and what led you here. So you originally studied music and planned a career as a jazz bassist. So what was it about that first darkroom class that completely changed your path? And how did your early photo experiences lead to that apprenticeship with Michael A. Smith and Paul Chamley, which I'm sure shaped not just like your technical skills, but also your philosophy on photography overall?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so that first darkroom course, like, I don't want to be cliche and say it's the magic of the print coming up.
No, but it is the magic of the print coming up.
But more than that for me, it was the physicality and the luminance of what a fiber-based silver gelatin print can be. And maybe I got lucky on those first couple prints and first couple pictures, because I was like, oh, this I think is all I ever want to do for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And so if I look back, 25 years later and say, oh, I was always trying to express something that I couldn't have words for.
Right.
So that was coming out through music. But there was a lot of family pressure for music too.
Oh, interesting.
And so you want to go and do what makes people happy.
Yeah, I can relate.
And exactly. So it was like a, just like what we'll get into later with growing up and kind of breaking off in terms of church going practice.
Right, right.
It was a similar kind of thing, but I thank everybody. I had the support for okay, if that's what you want to do, okay, we have no feelings about it.
Awesome.
But awesome. it was like that kind of am I going to join the Marines? Am I going to go, be a musician in New Orleans? And in that time period, I just picked up cameras given to me. I was like, oh, maybe I had this idea of I'll photograph while I'm in New Orleans. That'll be cool. Let me take a darkroom course to learn how to actually use this thing. And then it was that's where it is for me.
So it spoke to you, resonated, and just a completely different level than anything before.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. Which then led into working and assisting people who are very darkroom oriented.
Yes, and
right?
So that's one of those other things. I got lucky. And luck
the
universe, whatever.
The universe guiding you there. Babe.
Yeah, we don't have to put a label on it, right?
Right.
But they would advertise in the first 2 pages of Black and White magazine, and there's like silver printing in that, like at that time period. This is 2001, 2002 maybe. And it kept saying silver chloride contact print under them. And I said, what is that? Like, I know what a silver print is. What's a silver chloride print? And it basically just means it's a contact printing paper. Like, it's slow. Right. You need to have a large format negative.
Right.
And it's like, okay, well, I need a big camera to do this thing because, like, I want to make prints like that. Then I would, like, look them up. This is early days of online forums and Googles. And, luckily they had a website that was about this paper, the silver chloride paper.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And they became the only distributors of it. And like, oh, this guy's been traveling around in his truck since the mid-60s, mid-70s, selling to museums all over the country and private collectors. Like, I want to do that. And, of course, this is right before the entire art world changed in, like, mid-2000s, right? So, but that became like, oh, that's a life I want. Make pictures in the landscape, sell to people. Like, cool. And so I just drove to Albuquerque, New Mexico from Joshua Tree when they were giving some talks and stuff for like a conference, and just like front row, like, my school books on my lap saying, how do you hire your assistants? And he basically at the end of the talk said, here, carry this box for me. And looked at my prints and said, okay, like, we might be able to work with you. And it was just like, oh, like, that's all it took. And then, of course, like, there's 20 years of stories like after that.
Yeah,
but,
of course.
But no, it's like, okay.
You showed up.
I showed up.
You were, like, interested on a whole other level.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what I learned from then, like, yes, I learned how to print like nobody's business.
Right.
But more than that, I think, is like, this is what a life as an artist looks like. That this is like what you do. Like,
interesting.
You make work, you print it, you live simply in all other ways so that you can focus your energy on that, like, in that direction. And it's like, oh, that's how you live. You surround yourself with things that push you in that direction.
Oh, that's a really interesting way to look at that. And their model, especially because both of them, the couple, are artists. Yes. So even more so, the life was focused on the art. Yeah. So great. So thinking like that then later led to where you are now, which is many years later. And currently your work in this exhibition is on view at the Goodyear Gallery at Dickinson College. And the show is called Still Small Voice, which is very evocative. Can you share the personal and spiritual roots of that phrase and why it resonates with this body of work that you're exhibiting? Also, you've written that the feeling of the, quote, that voice, in not hearing it in church per se, but in the desert. So how do these landscapes carry that kind of spiritual weight for you? Yeah,
it's like one of those things where, it's probably always been there because of growing up where I did with who I did and that. But I grew up at LDS or Mormon. And I really felt it. And I think that is, sorry if I get emotional, what then translates into the work. And so, like, I really felt it. But then as I started, growing up, like, you hit adolescence and you start to have some independence. You start reading about Hinduism and Buddhism and Carl Sagan. And I'm like, there's got to be more than sitting here and doing this. And there's always something in me like, this is what I'm supposed to feel, right? Like the people pleasing. But when I go out and hike in the desert, like we would go out after school into the park or the national park, the monument at the time.
Joshua Tree.
In Joshua Tree, exactly.
Oh my gosh, that's like your after school park. That's crazy.
Yeah, like I would. This is so my granddad was a ranger at Joshua Tree. That's why I ended up living there. It's like we ended up living with my grandfather, and he was a ranger in the at Joshua Tree, like from 77-ish, 75 to like 83 when he retired. And so I grew up living with him, and we would go to these landscapes, and I say landscapes, but like, we would go fishing basically in like the Eastern Sierra. But after school, I would take the bus to Black Rock Campground. The ranger that took over for him lived there. His wife basically babysat us. And by babysat, I mean like go play in the hills behind the house. And so I grew up doing that for several years. Then when I got a car in high school, you go after football games, you go up into the park and like you sit on rocks and you look at the stars and like you talk and whatever else you do as teenagers.
Right.
And like, so that is where like all this comes from, right? And so you have this independence, this breaking away of like your spiritual upbringing, your religious upbringing, but still feeling like something deep is there, but not finding it in church, but in the rocks, looking at the stars walking slowly through the desert. Like that's where I found it. That's where I felt it. And then when I started photographing, that just kind of naturally showed up in the work.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Because that resonated with really who you were, what you were already connecting with deeply. And then that setting is just so impactful.
Exactly.
Also, right?
Like even like the smell, you hit the smell, the creosote, when it gets a little bit wet, like it turns you on in some ways that you just can't really like say with words.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of the work that you're exhibiting, as you were just talking about, began actually after your father's passing and right after your son's birth. So how did that time in Death Valley allow you to process both the grief and joy and transform them into art, particularly through photographs made at night, guided only by moonlight, and also the glowing solar images in the show? So how did you embrace both this darkness and light, and how did that influence the process you went through and then the results of the prints?
Yeah, the Death Valley trip was kind of scheduled before, so he had cancer basically right before COVID. So I had this like trip scheduled, and I was going to be like my first kind of photo trip after like my son was born. It's like, okay, I've done the stay-at-home dad thing for a while, and I'm going to get back and start making pictures and, do some teaching. And that was a trip for that. And then the world changed, like my world, my, family world, the outside world changed. But that trip, he passed away. He had cancer, yes, but like it kind of went suddenly, unexpectedly.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. And everyone's like, go on your trip. And like, okay, I did. And then it was a totally different kind of trip. And the pictures I was making, like, just turned into these canyon pictures where it's like, it sounds so kind of silly, but like this like passage, and there's like this light at the end of this dark passage. And then coming through that, I started hiking back at night through those canyons, and then kind of reconnecting like, oh, this is what I used to do as a kid, like, teenager kid, or like you'd walk through the desert talking with friends, or you're by yourself looking at the stars. And so it kind of like gave that entry back into like, oh, like kind of reconnecting with like the deeper, like who I am, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. So, right, you actually have, and also in your personal life, you have this sort of torn, grief over your father and the joy of having your first child born, right?
Yes.
I mean,
that's
what a dichotomy.
And that's where I was thinking about how like these generational relationships are so formative and like have so much importance, and like what I was getting as a father, what I could give, what I learned, what my son was going to miss out on, like all that stuff. Like it doesn't, it shows up in the pictures.
It totally does.
But in this
abstract.
But this really abstract way because like that's the only way I can do it without crying.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what, when I look at those images and hear you talk about them, I feel like that kind of mystical in-between space, that liminal space, is what's in your pictures.
And that's kind of what gets, and I think we'll, get there. But like that's where I was photographing these canyons. Then I started photographing at night. And then this idea of what's the real world, what's this invisible world, where that boundary is, and how the technology I was using kind of shaped what those pictures started to look like.
Right. And then also you brought in images of the sun with these flares, which are dated specifically on the dates of these momentous occasions.
Dates and time within 5 minutes. Because of how the satellites capture these signals.
So one of one is when your father passed away, one is when your son was born, exactly to the date and almost exactly to the time.
Minute, yeah.
And these are flares that were happening on the sun itself. They're sort of astronomical photographs.
Yes. So it's based on, it's just like previous work I did using some satellite imagery or scientific data and imagery. But it was the kind of work I started in 2012 around the sun and solar flares, and how we're one solar flare away from all of this going away. All our modern technology and life as we know it could go away with the massive solar flare. Mm-hmm. And so that's what that 2012 work was kind of built around. And I was developing the techniques, 10 years ago or so, to then lead into this new work and how like we can use astronomical time to mark these events and kind of like signify like, yeah, these are really important events for me, but in terms of everybody else in the world, just they're not even as fast as I click my fingers. And they're gone. And that's just like how life is.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah. How, when these momentous things are happening around the world, like we're eating breakfast, or they're eating breakfast while the momentous thing is happening to us. Yeah. So that's such a amazing layer of material. So I want to hear more about this, Richard. We're going to hear a little bit more after a short break, so stay with us. We'll be back with more Art Watch. Welcome back to Art Watch. I'm Amie Potsic, and we're talking with photographer Richard Boutwell about his current exhibition, Still Small Voice, at the Goodyear Gallery at Dickinson College through October 6th. So, Richard, your work bridges centuries, actually, using 19th century hand-coded techniques alongside cutting-edge 21st century digital technology. So your prints are platinum palladium, large-scale carbon inkjet prints, and specialized papers coated with metal leaf. So can you explain what makes these processes special and particularly challenging, and how you see them in conversation with each other?
Oh, yeah, good question. So this kind of gets back to that darkroom course, that, week 2 of like we're making a print. It becomes about the physicality of the object. And platinum has a particular quality. For me, it's in the dark tones. And then some of the papers I use for the show, like similar type thing. But because the metals seep into the fibers of the paper, it has a luminance and depth that you don't get with something that's sitting on top of the paper. So that was my, it wasn't about using a historical process. It was about what does this do? What are the physical qualities of this thing that translate to my work? So that was kind of the...
So it was a fit to what you were trying to communicate.
And some of that is also like I didn't have a darkroom where I could make a silver print for a while. And so this you could do, basically in your bedroom with some UV lights and a couple trays from the Walmart,
Right, literally.
That's your sink, and you take them to the bathroom and wash them. So some of it was based on my studio at the time, studio being the bedroom, really.
Right.
But you're an artist, you're in your studio, wherever it is.
So many photographers, their bathroom is their darkroom,
exactly.
Right?
Yep.
The tub is where they rinse the prints. Yeah. Not good for taking a shower and putting your feet in there later, but...
it's some roommates... issues, but
exactly.
it's another story.
Exactly.
But then, with platinum, it's also like the silver chloride paper where it needs to have a negative the size of the image you want to make.
Right.
So around the time I started doing this remote sensing work with like the satellite imagery, basically using Google Earth as my camera, and by stitching together hundreds of Google Earth images, that's kind of what led into the platinum print. It's like I wanted to make these things larger, so then I need to do this digital work to then translate it to this 19th century process. So it just became like a function of what I was trying to do with one particular project. Yeah, it's just it just kind of like you follow the road until it gets you, wherever we're going.
Yep.
And it just happened to be that. And so then it led into like this whole other rabbit hole of having to develop tools to make that transition as seamless as possible. Let's say it's always tricky, but it's just one thing comes after another with how all of this stuff ever works, So
you really created software yourself that would allow you to make the high quality positive to print the platinum palladium print.
Yeah.
So you're going analog, digital, analog,
exactly.
Essentially.
Or sometimes just digital analog. But
with the satellite imagery.
Exactly, or digital cameras. Once the cameras kind of got
good enough, quote unquote. Yeah,
exactly, quote unquote.
Yeah. Yeah, right. That's
when I could get the quality that I
yeah.
actually wanted in the print with pure digital capture, great. But we still need that intermediate point. And it's just how computers and printers and processes work, that you need this translation layer. And people have been doing this with digital negatives maybe since the mid late 90s.
Oh, okay.
Using like stuff for offset printing to make
yes,
the actual negatives.
Right.
But there's always that calibration step. What I came up with is like not exactly revolutionary, but it made it easy for almost anybody to do it. And so
it's pretty revolutionary.
I just don't want to like
software. No, really. When I saw what you had created, I was like, this is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Literally.
But it's a function of like what I needed for my work.
Right.
Like I had to teach myself software development so I can make a print. Like it's kind of
right. Well, you didn't. You chose to and then you were able to make an even better negative than you could
Yes.
through whatever means were currently available, essentially.
Yeah.
And, essentially before this kind of software, people had to take a photograph with a large camera to create a large negative to make a contact print, and then the contact print is exactly the size as the negative.
Mm-hmm.
So some artists that I've spoken with who do platinum palladium, they've shot with 4x5, 5x7, 11x14, 17 by 20 by 24 negative size cameras. It's insanity. What and also really fun. I mean, I think the cool thing about what your medium is, like, there's so many fun ways to do it.
Yeah.
And I know that you get a lot of pleasure out of making these prints.
And so there's also the aspect of like what the equipment used to make the pictures does to the kind of pictures you end up making. It's like,
right.
Where you're, say, limited, but like it opens up avenues even when you're using a camera of that size.
Exactly.
So one's not better than the other.
No,
it's just like
different.
What do you need for the work you're trying to make?
So speaking of that, of these sort of technological options, so you've begun combining photographs with 3D scans and scientific data. So what excites you about expanding the photographic image in this kind of technology, and what can you communicate that's different in this new visual language?
Yeah, so like I think this is like somewhat like understood. Like photography has always been about technological advance.
Absolutely.
From daguerreotypes to digital cameras, like it's always about technological advance. Like what, and so there's no concrete thing of like this is a photograph.
Right.
Right. And so if I come from this, say, lineage of straight black and white, straight meaning in terms of what you put the camera in front of,
exactly,
is the thing that you get.
Traditional photography.
Mm-hmm. Where does that go in the 21st century? Because like I love putting an 8x10 in the landscape and making a picture. Like there's still that joy I always had from doing that.
Right.
What other things can we do to bring out that same joy? And that might be like spending more time in a space making a LiDAR scan. So we're still using light, right? We're using lasers and the time of flight to capture the depth. And then go into this digital world. So you have all of the experience of being there and capturing all that data using air quotes. That then generates the picture on the computer, and you have a totally different experience making that picture that is separate from the one you had there, but still draws from it.
Right.
And then that becomes a photograph. Like it's
right, because you're using a photographic process. It's not the same kind of photograph.
Yeah.
But you're expanding the definition of a photographic print, really.
Exactly.
And just the quality of the light and the sparkling data points become these like firefly just sparkles of light. It's so absolutely gorgeous to see the canyon in this three-dimensional space, but all of these data points that you gather become these sort of little flares of light. Yeah. And so it's like seeing the canyon full of fireflies.
Yes.
It literally is magical.
And that's what I love about the process is they're fireflies, they are galaxies.
Absolutely.
They could be anything.
Oh, it absolutely looks like stars for sure as well. It's because you're on the ground and it is showing you the architecture of the landscape. It's sort of that mind bending. I'm looking at the stars. I'm looking at, the inside of my consciousness. Like literally, it's like that expansive. I think it's really exciting. And so, this new work kind of fits in with a whole body of work you've been working on for many years, where much of your work wrestles with conservation, water rights, and the human footprint on the land in this same landscape. So how does Still Small Voice connect with those larger issues? And how do you see the practice contributing, your general practice, to the ongoing sort of story of American landscape photography, which you are definitely part of that conversation?
Yeah. So the landscape work tied to the conservation, water rights, that came out around in like 2006, I think. So I'd moved to the East Coast in 2002, and I was photographing around here, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and to me they just became visual studies or like photographic, like technical practice. Great, but it had no emotional connection with it because this is not. I'm here to work. here to learn. Yes, like I can go to Philadelphia and see a museum, like be inspired by the work in the museum, but I don't feel really deeply connected to it. And around 2006, I was like, I just want to make work that I feel deeply connected to. And then that led into like basically going back to California for the first time in probably 4 years. Maybe about 2 years, let's say. And then looking at that landscape with like kind of a fresh perspective, but drawing on the childhood experiences there and how this landscape that like so many people feel so deeply about, like the California desert, is only possible because we're pumping groundwater or drawing it from the Colorado River. And so that's where it turned into like doing like documenting wetland restoration, where we would go fishing in that area where Los Angeles drew its water, in 1913, built the aqueduct. They're mandated to restore 62 miles of river after 25 years of lawsuits. So I started photographing that process, like what does regrowth look like in this area that's been like totally, not to say destroyed, but it was managed. It becomes a managed landscape. So I was photographing that kind of process. And then that just turns into the Colorado River issues, the drought, and just like kind of grappling with my existential dread of climate change and having like this visual record of it and like make something that's inescapable. But all of the other approaches to picture making in the landscape is all the same. Like the feeling of being there, like, yes, I'm photographing the Hoover Dam, but everything else around the picture is having this like emotional influence. On how we're looking at the picture, or how I'm making a picture.
Well, that was one of the things that struck me when we were looking at your work that is of the dam and of this, conservation, and the work that's in the exhibition, which is a sort of a related counterpoint that just expands the conversation, right? Yeah. It's like, here's this informative, beautiful narrative. It's gorgeous, but it's also very informative and helpful in like sparking action, where the work you have in the exhibition sort of takes that to the next level and also invites you to personalize it, as opposed to only having it be about that narrative, about the conservation. So that's what I love about it. Kind of is both sides of the coin of what you're doing.
It's like you make something personal and hopefully that becomes universal. Like the more personal you can make it. Yeah.
Honestly, I find that more and more. The more personal something is, the more universal it is. When we try to like look outside ourselves, always about our work, it's about the thing, right? And the more it's about us is about everybody, because we're all the same.
Thank you.
We all like have shades of differences, but like really we're all human beings with the same kinds of existential concerns and just any kind of art that sort of opens you up to that conversation, I think is so valuable and such a great experience, and can simulate and sort of evoke the experience you have in the desert. So someone can come in your gallery and just be like, psh, mind blown, and then not only like and sort of question, be kind of dazzled, but also then in their own way start to think about these issues of loss and love and how these things come together, and the stars and the moon and the desert, and sort of how all of them are related. So I really appreciate this work, and I'm so glad to have you here today. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. So Richard's solo show, Still Small Voices, on view through October 6th at the Goodyear Gallery at Dickinson College. More information on the exhibition and Richard's work can be found at richardboutwell.com. Also, he's going to have a studio tour to be able to see this work again in person in December. So stay tuned for the scheduling of that studio visit. Join us on Wednesdays on Art Watch from 1 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern on WCHE 95.3 FM and 1520 AM. Recent podcasts of Art Watch can be found on 953wche.com, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. You can also find the podcast of this episode and more information on my guest at amiepotsicartadvisory.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.